Okay, so we're going to jump into the conversation. Josh is going to lead us off, and it's going to be fun. So I think you'll get an insight into many WhatsApp calls, texts, and emails that have been happening for the past almost year or so. And so I think it's going to be very enriching. So I'll turn it over to Josh.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Yes, there we go. So there are a few kind of threads of things that we'd like to engage over the next short while. Some of them, as Larry pointed out, pertain to what the project's done, to be able to have works from the continent round the corner and to be able to bring them here made this possible. And I think it really points to what a collection can be and what that kind of spirit of collecting can be. So thank you, and yeah, it's something special that will be shared widely. So there's sort of interest in how the curatorial process unfolded, meaning that we have our own interest in trying to unpick it. And then, of course, we've got two fantastic artists with us from Angola and from South Africa. And it's been really a pleasure to work with both. We just met, but Nick and I know each other from some time ago. And I want to ask some questions about what it's like to have work in a completely different place and what it means to the process and what it could mean moving forward. So one thing I did want to share was a little bit about the title, Crossing Night. It's a phrase that I heard years ago, and it was used by printmakers, so master printmakers who would make a limited edition. They were using it to describe the process of starting a print edition and finishing it by cruising through the night. Nowadays, there isn't the same, I don't experience the same level of rigor attached to printmaking. People often start a print process, make a few off the plate, and then a year later maybe complete the edition. But in these guys' cases, they believed that once you started, you finished it. And if that meant moving through the night, then that's what you did. There was a documentary made about a really potent print studio in Johannesburg called Artist Proof Studios, which is at once an educational facility and a master print shop, where Hlantla Chaba, who was one of the co-founders, while crossing night, fell asleep. There was an electrical short, the building burned down, and he passed away. So it was a kind of really evocative instance of someone committed to a process and ultimately becoming, I suppose, sadly being lost in that process. But Artist Proof Studios rebuilt, and it exists today as a thriving educational facility and print studio. And so that phrase has this other evocation of being able to sort of sustain that trauma and come out on top in some capacity. And for a long time, it was, in fact, a sculptural set of works by Nicholas and a photographic series that's on display here through a newspaper by Peter Hugo that I first felt this resonance of what does it mean to, one, be rigorous in every aspect of artistic production and care, and to exist in the liminal, in that terrain where it's not quite clear whether it's day or night, and to find peace in that, and that uncertainty and that potentiality that resides in that sort of uncertain terrain. And over time, that idea kind of sat around, and it has become now, through collaboration with Wedge, with MOCAD. In fact, it was already originally conceived of to be here. And there was an instance of Crossing Night, a very different exhibition, but that was in Mexico about a year ago, curated by Francisco Brazunza, that looked at death practices in Mexico and in Southern Africa. In this instance, the idea was to look at the liminal, but look at it through the eyes of the city and sort of see whether we could find connective tissue between some of the concerns in Southern Africa and some of the concerns that were here. Context done. So maybe I'd like to ask you, Larry and Jova, I'll start with you guys. What were your concerns at the outset about working on a project that looked at work that was from afar? How has that unfolded, and how do you feel, what's the tissue you feel now through the work we've had and looked at and engaged and the artists you've interacted with the region that is in fact quite far away? Jova.
Okay. So I think for me, it's been really interesting as working very digitally on this exhibition, because actually the three of us were not in the same room until Sunday, I think. And so interesting thinking about the way we curated the exhibition as holding a digital or media-based space and then producing a media-based exhibition is something that was very intriguing to me. When you say from so far away, it's interesting because, as Kenneth mentioned, I'm of Jamaican descent. And so for me, the sort of having to be on WhatsApp, having to conceptualize things from far or be in touch with what seems far is sort of everyday life. And so in that sense, it was just exercising that muscle a little bit harder than usual. But I think the real sort of meat of what was interesting with the three of us is that we all sort of come at it from a very different perspective, from very different experiences, right? And so for me, crossing night and sort of hearing about where it came from, I really, really think about the archive, right? Like the photograph is a documentation of a certain place and time and moment. And it can suppose a future or it can represent a past, but it's still some sort of documentation. And I think in sort of trying to figure out, okay, what are the connections between the work that the artists in the Southern African region are doing, and how do we sort of present that not as something of the past, but something of the present, felt very important to me, because I think when you think about archive, you think about one automatically goes into years and years ago or certain political moments, but there are political moments happening all around us right now. And so it was really important for me to think about how do we really show the presence not only of the work but of the artists themselves, because we could only bring 2 artists here and there are 22 artists participating in the exhibition. And so I think one thing that really struck me was looking at a Guy Tillum piece, which was actually loaned by Kenneth Montague. And it's if you look at the exhibition, it's sort of the first photograph that you see when you walk in. And it's this sort of industrial landscape that happens to be in Mozambique, but Guy Tillum is from South Africa. And so initially when I saw the work, I without looking at the title, I was like, where is this? Could it be Kingston, which is a city that I'm really familiar with? Is this South Africa? Is it somewhere else, anywhere else? I did not know, and I really appreciated that joy in the universality and like thinking about architectural structure as a signifier for something that was and something that is. And so I think that sort of helped.
Can I push something onto you, Larry? In lieu of that, is like, can you speak a little bit about the regional coordinates? So these things are from a place, but then in some instances, one need not know their place.
Yeah.
And how important is it to stage them inside the place, or can you imagine a case where they could be fractured and exist without preceding it with a sort of regional context?
I think for me, contextualizing the show within the Southern African region was very important, because I think even there are times when I was talking about the show and I would just kind of say South Africa, and I think it was important to acknowledge, what's happening in Angola, what's happening in Zimbabwe. There's a connective thread, but even as Nicholas and I were talking the other night, they're all kind of individual spaces having unique conversations, but then there are conversations that overlap in different places. But I think it was also important, how do those conversations connect with what's happening in this region? And how can someone who lives in Detroit or Michigan or come and see the show see a bit of themselves in this conversation? So I think regionality gave us a framework and a rubric to work with. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to put this show together. But then I think it also gave us some space to take some liberties in terms of thinking about the lens-based practice, thinking about how that's articulated not just through a photograph, but through a takeaway, through a tabloid. So it gave us a rubric, but I think it also gave us a nice sense of freedom in terms of how we thought about the show, how we wanted the viewer to engage with the show, and I think also what's being learned. Like earlier this morning, we did a walkthrough of the show with some teens from Detroit, and it was interesting to kind of listen to what they see. And Josh asked one of the students, because these artists are not from a place that you're familiar with, does it, feel inviting or does it feel weird? And he, confidently said, no, I want to know more. So I think creating a space where the viewer wants to know more about these places and understand that, issues of identity, political challenge, but then I think also political opportunity aren't things that are just happening in the U.S., but it's a global issue. And so using the Southern African region as a lens, I think was exciting and important. And I learned a lot.
Banale. Can I ask you on that basis, you're from Angola,
Yes.
and how important is that to the things you do, like being framed up as from a place, and in lieu of being here now, seeing and thinking about your work staged inside a Southern African conversation, where are you on that?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I think it's the door. It's the way to explain how a story too about Angola, because you was talking about identity, and I don't know if you know Angola. We was like during more than 27 years on war, and many people don't know about Angola because we just listen about war and corruption, Africa, and I think be here and have this show, for example, with the Nicola, it's very important because we was in war too with South Africa, and here we are like brothers and we show our work together, but 30 years before or 20 years before it was impossible just be together, and be here is like the new story will start like that with this kind of things.
Beautiful. It's so true. It's one of those sort of things about narrative and what moves and what doesn't. South Africa, we tend to have this really complex history with Angola off the back of a silent war, really. And that's a lot of what's spoken of when Angola's negotiated, is this thing that happened or didn't happen, the atrocities associated. But I think that's a beautiful idea that here is this potential to birth something else.
Yes,
Yeah.
but they just say you are with these South Africans. Say yes, yeah, here we chill out together. And he was just surprised, and because he knows about the war and these kind of things. So, but it's very nice.
Is there still a stigma?
Yes, because it's very. We are in Paris like 12 years, and it's fresh. It's fresh. It will need a generation, to retell the story. I think, and we start to do that now with these kind of shows, and talks, and have exhibitions, and be together.
So for some context, Binel's pieces in the exhibition is the neon sign, "Fuck It's Too Late," as well as the cement laptop sort of embedded, and the monitor piece, "In God We Trust." And so there's a lot of themes about capitalism and colonialism within your work. I would also say, like, something that we had been talking about earlier is this idea of working in a post-colonial state. Your work, Nick, is that you're dealing with materiality of these sort of leftovers. So it's not, even though you have a video, the way you're using industrial material in that laptop piece really does speak to this, like, departure, right? And so I'm wondering, and maybe Nick, you can say a little bit more about this. In terms of your practice, you're talking a little bit about spirituality and being connected or disconnecting, and wondering about the materiality of your practice in terms of this idea of working as an artist in a post-colonial time.
Post-colonial time, that's an interesting one, because I don't believe that we have drifted too far from there. With me, the curiosity is about building my perception and possibly suggesting to people to have a way of looking at themselves anew. But what I do is more about me. It is inspired by the place of origin, where I come from, and what happens around in the world as a whole. I mean, colonialism is one of the things that I celebrate in the work, because I'm of a belief that without colonialism or apartheid in South Africa, I think my perception of myself, because I'm preoccupied with my identity and how I got to be, I don't think it would be the same. In spite of the ugliness of the events that took place. I mean, South Africa was built as a result of colonialism, and we had apartheid, and now we have democracy. And all those things, as negative as they might be, or might have been, now, to me, I feel they have a very positive kind of contribution onto my understanding of who I am. And as I drift through, meet everyone else, I have a story to tell. To me, it is about that ongoing process that we all are embarked on, that we never in one state of affairs, whether politically speaking or spiritually speaking or culturally speaking, we're always on the move. And being on the move, I find to be very important, because if I had to choose, I choose the idea of constantly moving and changing all the time to that of being fixed to one space. For being fixed to one space, I believe you become stagnant and you die. And you don't get anything more rewarding and positively rewarding out of being in a fixed space. So, yeah.
Can we speak a little bit about the work here in light of those questions? So, Nicholas's piece is in the corner over here. It's a performance piece in some sense. It's a sculptural piece in another. And this is the second iteration of it being realized, right? The first was in Boston, was that?
Yes, it was in Boston.
And you've said to me that in prior, or you said to us, I think, that performances are things that effectively happen once, whereas in this instance, it felt like something that there would be value in iterating or restaging or staging again. Can you just sort of point to that and like how it, about that idea, but also about last night and what that felt like?
Last night, as we were crossing again, the piece that I had to re-perform here is titled Toba Utsale Umnxeba, meaning lower yourself and make a call. When I conceived the performance the first time in Boston, it was anchored on the idea of my being an alien in Boston. That was my first time in the United States, and I still am an alien here. It was about bringing up about ideas, or perhaps ideas of trying to connect, whether from a physical perspective or spiritual perspective or just psychological perspective. It was about making a connection, somehow in a respectful way, getting down and submit yourself to all the various elements you have around you to learn. The purpose was to learn. And I had to do that again here. I mean, it was not an easy decision to say, yes, I'll do it, because I felt, I'm of a belief that a performance for me, I only do once. After that, the set or the costumes and other things that I use for the performance just become the sculpture that I present there. Because when I'm in a performance, I see that as my way of allowing the sculpture to have a soul, because I get to be there and assume that character. But what I was doing there was trying to reconnect again with this place and connect with the world as a whole. Because when I was sitting there, I was finding myself taking inventory of where I am now, how far I've traveled to be here, reflecting on my country and how far we have come to be where we are and how far we still have to go.
What was your impressions, because this is your first time to Detroit, and so a lot of this experience shaping the show existed a bit in the imaginary, although we sent you images and video. I guess, what was your impressions, what were your thoughts in terms of shaping the show and your hopes that the viewer would get from the experience, particularly being from South Africa and also representing the region as a citizen of that space?
Maybe I'll start with the things that are like less surprising, actually. And I was just talking to Scott about this a minute ago, that it's obvious on the one hand, but also still curious that from very far away, you're going to arrive in a space that's got a gallery, and the gallery is going to look more or less like you think a gallery is going to look, and the artworks are going to look more or less like artworks, and we can work with them. So one's not arriving into a framework that's very different from the frameworks we understand from a mechanics point of view. And that is actually, in a way, more interesting to me than I would have thought beforehand. That whether we're going to do an exhibition in China or we're going to do an exhibition in Detroit, if we're agreed to the language of the arts and we're sort of speaking through it on that in a certain kind of way, then there's an agreement to what the conditions of display are, an agreement to the sort of terms of exchange. And that's kind of interesting because it makes it mutable. It means that the pictures arrive and they show up and they'll have resonances and differences, but also similarities, and it makes and then on the other hand, it's also, this isn't about Detroit, this is about the world. It's like a little disappointing in a way. You want to go somewhere and go, well, what could an exhibition space look like, and feel that would be a complete surprise. You know, what would that be like, and what would it take for that to exist inside the same sort of general set of conversations and so on. So that's just a bit about art, I suppose, or the mechanics of it. I must say, it feels very warming to see the pictures on the wall here. Many of these things I've seen many times. I know most of the people that have taken them. And I feel like, I suppose, a generosity from them that they're here, that the things are here, that Nick's here, that Bernard is here, and I feel the presence of the people like Ati and Sabelo and the guys that I know from around that are active and working, and to see their things travel means, that they conceived of these ideas for their own reasons, and here those things are thousands of miles away, sort of communicating and connecting, and having those conversations with those young teens was beautiful. It was like fascinating to see their enthusiasm and interest and the potential sort of opening of ideas from far afield. So all in all, I found the interaction just fluid and encouraging, and like I say, there's certain parts of that are like just about the art world and its kind of mutability. And then the other side is a bit like, I'm not friendly with artists per se, but it does feel like a community is here. And that feels warming. Yeah. Can I ask you then about photography? Like I've got some ideas as to how we landed here, but it's very much a lens-based initiative. In fact, not photography, but lens-based. Can you maybe just share a bit about how that came to be?
Part of that was a practical reason. There are 22 artists in the show. And anyone who's put together an exhibition will understand how challenging it might be to ship that much work to one place. But I think, as you mentioned, the mutability of photography or lens-based practice, I think I personally was interested in what are artists within the region doing to push the form beyond a traditional photograph that's on the paper. Or you have Peter Hugo's tabloid, or you have Professor Zanelli Mahole's wallpaper piece, Edson Chagas' poster piece. But then also thinking about moving image as a platform for archiving. So also thinking about this notion of the contemporary archive. I think those were exciting possibilities to me. When I think about the work that's being made in the region, I think about those modalities and those ways of working. I don't necessarily think about painting per se, and not saying that there aren't artists who are excelling in those mediums, but I feel like those are the mediums, and a lot of times that's circumstance in terms of cost and ability to produce that really resonated, and I think gave us a rubric to start with in terms of how we wanted to shape the show and generate a conversation. And I think there's an accessibility to photography or lens-based practice that you might not necessarily get in an abstract painting, for example. Yeah.
And
Jova?
Just to add to that, I think that is the lens. Every nonprofit, every museum has a budget and a way we can do these things. And I think a part of having lens-based work is that it is so mobile, but it's also something that, like, I think about our relationship with Wedge throughout this exhibition, and Ken and Maria gave us a list of works that we could select from, and sort of how we came up with the rubric was not solely about the lens and it being easy to just drive across the border rather than have to create a bunch of works. But also thinking about how we wanted to represent what was going on in these places, right? So like the image that's behind us, Jody Brand. This is a piece by the artist Jody Brand that's printed on fabric. So not only is it a photograph that's huge, it's actually on a material. One thing that we talked about this morning with the young people who are in a photography workshop right now taking portraits is just the different ways you add value to these objects, to the photograph as an object, when you display it as a moving image, as a fiber piece, as a newsprint, as a takeaway, as a sculpture. And I think really that's something I really appreciated about working with you two on this, is wanting to push that boundary a little bit more and not just do a show solely with framed photographs.
It just, again, the technical tends to me at least be interesting. Many of these pictures were, from Wedge, and then a whole bunch of them were printed in South Africa, rolled up and sent. And in that way we could, with permission from the artist, but that way we didn't have to insure them at their value, their like return value, it was print value. And that made it viable, made us able to reach out quite widely. So it's an interesting quality of photography that it has this capacity to produce like a huge amount of value with relatively little financial value, all said and done. And then there were cases like, for example, with Peter Hugo, The Journey. It's also an interesting case. The first time I interacted with that piece, it was a triptych photo piece in Cape Town, very fantastic representation of itself. Then he made these newspaper versions, and then very recently I saw a set of photogravures, like exceptionally well printed photogravures of them, and they have very different, they cost differently to make and to move around. And he was incredibly open and fluid to like how we wanted to share the work, and we said actually we want to share the newspaper, and we want to share it in a way where people can sit and read it. He was very excited by that. So it was us solving a problem, but also recognizing the sort of potential of that work represented in that way. And then also, like I say, we'll be curious if you guys ever have opportunity to see the work in its different formats. The photogravure, for example, is a long line of like very delicately printed things relative to this like sort of takeaway newspaper instance.
I wanted to just piggyback a point Jova has made about material. And I would like to hear from Benel and Nicholas in terms of what informs the material that you use in your practice in the works, particularly here, because the computer piece you made here, and what was the influence of making that piece here as opposed to shipping it from abroad? How did that change? How you thought about it? How you constructed it?
It's because it's a lot of money to send that from Angola, because it's one of the most expensive country in the world, and make it here is better, and the story too it's very strong, because I was working with the dollars, the computers in Apple, and put this image of the dollars on the computer, create the piece here, buy the material here, and everything from here. It's more deep, and you put more attention, I think, on the piece. And it's the same for the video too. On my video, come back, I don't know if you saw the video, the kids was talking about travel, go to America, have the good life in America, and now they are here in MOCAD. And I showed you this video with the kids, so it's more strong. And the fuck it's too late too. It's strong because this idea, the fuck it's too late, starts in Houston when they say I cannot send the chicken to the moon, and I say fuck it's too late because America already have the flag in the moon. So I make the Neo here, and the car in God We Trust. It's about the dollars too, and it's like it's sure. Sure. It's, I don't know, c'est très bien d'être ici, to fait ici. It's very, very nice to put all this work about the economy, the war, and America things just here. It's fantastic, no?
To me, the materials are there for a very important reason. As I tell my stories, they form a part of the paragraphs in the storytelling. For example, the inner tire tubes, the rubbers that I use there, they make some kind of celebratory kind of acknowledgement of how far we have evolved as human beings when you look at industrialization. When you think of rubbers, initially they came from trees, and somehow to save the trees, then they were made in a laboratory, and in this day they somehow are disappearing. Those are from cars, from the car wheels, and cars today do not have inner tire tubes, they're tubeless. And in my stories, my gender identity also is one of the things I look at and celebrate. And when you think of inner tire tubes from a car, they're not far removed from homosexual subcultures. If you think of the sadomasochists, for example, if you'd go to adult shops, you'd find sex toys and costumes made of the same material, and even given detail that is similar to that of a tire tube, but have some lines. And we live in an AIDS age, and the rubber and the condom are related somehow, they're cousins. And to me, the materials are there to be a part of the storytelling. And when you think of the inner tire tube, it's a material that is flexible. It allows for you to pack it up at times beyond its capacity. And to me, it's a material that resembles ideas of safety. If you're in a car, you're as safe as in a car as long as your tire is not pricked. If it's pricked, then you're not safe anymore. You get a puncture. If at high speed, you might just roll off the road. And pair that or compare that to sex activity, you are safe in a sexual act as long as your condom is intact. Once it's pricked, you no longer, it's questionable. So it's looking at those things, and we have I use leathers as well, and stitch all those using the synthetic thread, using ribbons. And ribbons there to me, they bring about ideas of most things feminine. If we look at fashion design, you rarely get ribbons used to embellish men's clothes. You mostly get them in women's clothes. And then we bring the idea of the feminine into play. And by cutting these materials and stitch them together, the process and how the materials are rendered then makes suggestions, or perhaps gets to point out to the process that we're going through as South Africans and what people in the whole world are going through, that we're constantly redefining the understanding of who we are by cutting and throwing away what we don't think fits anymore and bring in elements that we believe they're supposed to be kept, and find some form of imaginary thread to piece them together. So that's the idea, that we somehow cut some bits off and re-render them to try and rebuild a new kind of idea of what it is that we stand for.
Amazing. Can I use that as a segue to just talk about representation in the exhibition and the sort of challenges of that? So, Jova, I'm going to ask you, as the only woman on this deck here, how do we deal with the question of accounting for different groups of people, whether it be gender, race, or other, and at the same time want to make decisions about artworks in service of the work itself? How is that balanced for you? Yeah. Larry, I'll push it over to you afterwards too, and maybe contextualize for audience, where some of those things would arrive, could it be? Well, our conversation, but also, in certain cases, maybe at a board level where someone looks down an artist list and says, oh, this doesn't represent this, doesn't represent that.
Yeah.
And, where does it play out and how does it affect you?
I mean, I think this sort of, the fact that I am the only woman a part of this is very, very much a symptom of the only woman sitting on this panel right now is very symptomatic of a larger issue of representation in the art world. And so I don't think that any one show or any one institution or any one public program can sort of shift those very institutionalized realities. And so I think when we were dealing with the show, it's not that there was a lack of women making work in the Southern African region. It's that we had limitation in terms of discipline, in terms of size, in terms of money. And so for me, it became really important where, okay, if we can't have equal representation of gender across the board, how do we represent identity in a broader spectrum in general, right? So I think a piece that we talked about and that was so important to me, or is so important to me in the show, besides this piece behind me, is Sir Professor Zanelli Mahole's piece. And we had been given a bunch to select from. But for me, the one we chose was so important in terms of the vulnerability of the artist. Specifically, Zanelli Mahole identifies as gender non-binary, and so having a representation of the Black body, specifically in a form that maybe suggests something else, felt really important to me. And so I'm so glad that it ended up here. But I think, again, this reality of being female, being young, being Black, being all the things that I am, and how that I do not think that I can separate my identity from the work that I do, whether it's curation or producing art. And I think being on a team of people who can respect that and hold those like identities while also coming up with something fluid together felt really important. And so, I mean, I think we did our best, but I still think we have a long way to go as well.
Larry, do you want to?
Yeah,
Talk
I
to
mean,
that.
just to echo what Jova shared, I think we tried to be hyper-conscious in terms of the works that were selected, aimed for as much balance as possible. And when there were opportunities to have these larger, striking images, I think we went for it. But I think also I look at this as the beginning of a larger conversation, and my hope is that it doesn't stop with this, and figuring out other ways to kind of explore these questions and queries through other projects and initiatives, that maybe we can collaborate on again, or through individual projects. But I know that it's an ongoing process, so it's not going to be, one show won't solve the problem. But I think every time you put together a show, making sure you're taking those steps. So I think about like Ati's pieces in the show, the video and the photograph. But I also think about Sabatsky's piece in the show, and what does that potentially represent. So I think we created some space for people to kind of ask more questions, come to some conclusions. But I want to believe we did the best we could. I'm actually excited about what we did.
I think it's great. I think we did so well, and I hope you all enjoy it, because you're the most important, actually. But I think we're running low on time, but I wanted to ask one quick question before we open it, which is Beneld and Josh and Nick have all been here for almost a week, roughly a week. Is there anything that you're taking with you? Because I think in bringing you all here, it was so important that it just doesn't stay here. I'm looking at Cheeto because he runs the Detroit Zimbabwe Cultural Center, and I think he talks a lot about exchange, and how exchange is one of the most important things that we could do as artists, is to share and collaborate and really have a cross-cultural thing. So it's not just, I'm looking at your work and then goodbye. And so I'm wondering if there's any morsel or anything that you have discovered during this week, and this is a question for each of you, and then maybe we give it to the audience, that you are taking with you as you leave Detroit, this place.
If I want to move to Detroit, maybe I love this city. It's like Luanda a bit. It's about no. But Detroit is very. It's for me. It's very. I grew up listening to music. I love electronic music, Kraftwerk, and Jay Dilla, and many artists from here, from Detroit. And being here is, first, it's very nice because I love music. And second, it was a big city. It Ford from here, many big industry, they're from here. So in Angola, we say sometimes Luanda will be like Detroit because we built these big buildings and we put a lot of money on some industry, and now we have this kind of problem there, economic problem there, because the oil just go deep the price. And sometimes we say, oh, we hope Rwanda gonna be like Detroit. We must take care. So, and I'm happy to see that here. But Detroit, it's like it's our rebuilding. But I spent 1 week here, but I feel it's not from the same people. I think the black people here, they still have problems. It's a new Detroit. It's for other people. It's not for the black people from here. So that's too Detroit. It's not this big city, So I know more about Detroit now. Yes. And thank Jova to bring me to many places out of the city. So now I have a new perception of Detroit.
I think for me, what I love about South Africa in particular, with all its challenges, is that things are fluid. You can get things done. It's got like a make-do attitude, systems, and we're not particularly well organized, and that creates opportunity to make things very quickly and combine people and act. And I've found in other kind of cultural ecologies that are more sophisticated and have more resources and are more developed that there isn't that level of fluidity, that capacity to improvise. But here, on account of the challenges that the city's faced, I get this like feeling of opportunity, represented very much in the physical and the spaces and the opportunity of those spaces. And I recognize, of course, that from a distance that there's like tons of bureaucracy that inhibits kind of energizing those things. But I feel excited by it because it has space to move, to grow. And in that regard, I think that practitioners from home, these guys being exemplars of it, have the familiarity with that to be able to actually see an opportunity and act on it. So I'd kind of love to see more artists from Southern Africa here. I think that'd be a kind of, like a really rich energy that could arise from that. And I wouldn't say that of many of the other places. There's something about the nascent opportunity of the place that feels exciting.
To me, what did I pick up from there? I mean, very educational course. I was surprised. I had a different perception of what Detroit would look like. And on getting here, it was a different kind of image entirely. And space is what I first got to notice, because I think I might have a very ignorant view of American cities, that they're all built up, whereas everything here was like very low rising. And but for the impression I had, perhaps I'd rather talk about the impression as opposed to what I picked up, which is what I picked up. I didn't get a sense of the people of this city. I know I have not moved that far to just get to explore, and I'm only here, 4 days, and I'm out day after tomorrow. And that's what I found to be very surprising and strange, and I asked Jova and also asked the Uber driver as to what is happening, because my impression is almost as though you're in the middle of a war, or that's the impression I had. But I enjoy the emptiness, the abundance of sky. And it's a place when I looked at, as of looking at the number of properties that are to let, what do you call it here, for lease, is that it seems like it's a place that I could easily make it my second home. Or in an interesting way, what it taught me was that you do not have to perhaps build your understanding of a place on the perception of where you've been in that region, that you need to be there and learn. Yeah, sorry.
So can we open it up?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Should we send that around? Oh, there.
Don't be shy. Questions, thoughts, feedback from the show. We have the artist here, our co-curator.
So, Benaldi, You talked about creating your computer piece here and the significance of that. And I'm wondering, will that piece now travel outside of the United States and what the impact of that might be?
I showed this piece in Lisbon too, but this installation, it's like the impact here is it's how I impact, because I know many people in Angola, they ask, for example, why we need $1 here, why we are waiting for the answer for the IMF. IMF is it? No, FMI? IMF. We don't understand, and I don't know if in America they know we need these dollars here in Africa. And even for me, I don't understand why we need $1 in Angola. Why don't we use our money? And the impact of this piece here, it's just what I was thinking when I was in Angola, to show that, because it's like bring a question to here too, because many people don't know. I was at the bar in this jazz bar. We drank a lot there, and I saw this lady. She come and she said, "Where you from?" I said, "I'm from Angola." And she said, "Oh shit, you from Angola?" And she was thinking I'm from the prison. So because they have a prison, it was like, and she saw me with a four girl. I was the only guy, and I was thinking they was in. I go to the bathroom, and the guy comes. He was thinking I was like a dealer or a gangster, or say, no, Angola is a country. They don't know Angola, they don't know. And bring that here is very important, because I bring one of the part of Angola too, the story. I answer your question? No. A little bit.
You answered something that I wasn't anticipating an answer for, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm still trying to get a sense of what happens when this travels away from here.
I hope sell the piece first. If I shift that, or Kenneth is there? Kenneth, please don't let me bring this piece. It's too heavy. So if it's a concrete computer, it's very hard to make this piece.
I guess the question really is what impact might it have globally now?
Yes, like I say, it's one of the. I bring a question to some place. I was in Sweden and I show the video. And now they know about Angola. Comeback, you saw the comeback, the video comeback, for example. The kids, they was there, they was trying like to travel to America, go to Brazil, have a good life, but people die trying to cross the Mediterranean from Syria, it's fantastic because I put a lot of humor, but at the end it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. So all my work is with this way, like humor, to talk about something very important. It's more easy for me, because even in Angola I cannot talk about problem because, we was like a war, and it's not like Switzerland, the country.
So do you think about it as a platform for some cultural exchange? So you show this piece in Lisbon, it has a read. You show this piece in the U.S., it has another read, and then is that how you think about it?
Yes, I'm thinking, and it's it's my objective, it's my goal, because we don't know, we don't have on other medium to talk about some problem. For example, to talk about the problem of water, healthy things in Africa is the door to bring this question out, because people see the first image when they saw kind of my works. It make them laugh, but at the end it's like they left the gallery trying to ask this question. Wow, they have this problem, but the guy put this problem with a lot of humor, And I'm thinking to do that in other countries too. It's.
Okay. Any other questions? There we go. Y'all being shy today, man.
Thank you so much for this really fascinating talk. Josh and I were discussing this a little bit before the talk, and I was wondering, I'd love to hear your thoughts on staging a show like this in Detroit specifically that has such unique demographics and being 85 to 90%, I think, African American. Interesting to hear your thoughts on having a show like this here as opposed to a different American city. Does your thinking about the show or what works do you choose, or how you think about an audience is going to interact with it, does it differ the fact that that it's here in Detroit as opposed to in New York or Chicago or LA or somewhere else?
So I think I was very aware, I think we all were very aware, but I in particular was very aware about the demographics of the city of Detroit and wanting to make sure we didn't want it to be only a portrait show either, but wanting to make sure that people who come, who live and breathe in the city feel represented in the galleries, and I think we did that successfully, I would say, and not in an egotistical way. I literally think we did that. I think that I do want to note that not all of the artists in the show are Black, which I think is important, because I think when you hear about the continent, you hear about, artists from somewhere in Africa, you automatically assume they're going to be Black, but there's a wealth of diversity in the countries in Africa as well. And so I think that was something that we talked a lot about too. One of the videos in the video room is a video called Welcome Visitors, and it's by Penny Siapasis. And it's essentially she's of Grecian descent, but born and raised in South Africa. And she intertwines found footage of a visit that Louis Armstrong did to South Africa, mashed up with the history of music in the country. And so I think that is like a really stunning example of not only the connections between Detroit as a music capital for the blues, capital for jazz, Louis Armstrong coming from the South, going north, going across the ocean. I think that is very emblematic of what happens in Detroit and how Detroit culture is exported, but also how African culture and American culture sort of is imported and exported in these ways. I don't know if that actually really answered your question, but.
I think this is a tricky one because, for example, I'd never been here before this moment, but at the same time, our aspiration was, we conceive of the thing as an iteration that is site-specific. It tries to understand something of the location in terms of the choices made. So in simple terms, that would mean that the show as it stands would not travel. The idea could travel and would iterate in relation to context. Maybe some works would overlap. So without getting involved in without trying to match things for the sake of matching, the question of regeneration was something that we were curious about. And like I said, even being here, that's the thing I really love about this potential. In the case of the exhibition, I'd say that regeneration is less an architectural, spatial regeneration and more like one of self, whether it be Ati or Nicholas. I think tons of Nicholas, in fact, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but so many of the works that I know feel like they're about the process of becoming one thing to another or being caught between those stages, almost like birthing in some cases. There's like this channel between places. So in that sense, that was the aspiration, was to take a look at a city in a way. And like I say, there's a caveat to that, like I've never been here. So what does that mean? There's limits to the way we actually executed that on the basis of, actual contact. But it's very much for here.
Bad thing of new ideas all the time.
Just that sort of coordinate or thread, you could say, some of your practice has been of a kind of regeneration of the kind.
Yes, actually, I think the path it assumes is that of a moss, if we're to think of plant forms. And if you're in a forest, and the mother plant might be here, but its offspring will be on the other side towards the exit here. So it's that idea that ideas grow all the time, and each time they move from one place to the next, they assume a new character. Because I think a lot of fun is happening there, like fun as well as tragedies taking place between you get to rest on that point and make your way to the next one. So that's where love making takes place, somewhere in between there, things grow there. I don't know if I get to add to what we're hoping that I add. Thanks.
I think we should.
Is there one more question before we wrap up? All right. This last question.
Oops. Hi. Thank you. So I'm just thinking about the spaces that are created in between all the different artworks and the story that that creates. And what I really am loving is the story among all of you and your relationships through this process, and what story that has made. And Jova, you were talking about WhatsApp and like how you had to push yourself a little bit. Like you're used to it, it's part of your everyday, but you were exercising some kind of like thing more for this. And I'm really interested in what you learned from that and what that was about. Because we're all on these devices, and we're becoming fragmented from each other, and you guys work with each other so far away, and it's really inspiring that it's possible.
I mean, I think what I was trying to say was I use WhatsApp all the time, but WhatsApp for me is so intimate. I don't know why. It's because I think I'm just like always talking to family members abroad when I'm using that platform, and so this is the first time I was really using it for work specifically, which is like Josh and Larry use it all the time for work, maybe. But for me, it's like really a way to be in touch with my family, and so it's super weird, bizarre building this like family dynamic with you all via the web, because it's like we are not related at all. So like this is cool, and I think it's funny because there's a moment in Binel's video where the car is in the water and people are responding to it, and the text messages are going and going and going and going, and that's kind of what we had too. It was just like, okay, we're just going, and it's way faster than email, and a lot more personal in that sense. So what I meant in mirroring that practice is like I think about like the way a photograph can go viral, or the different ways that we deal with media and process it in our lives. What I meant when I said we sort of mirrored what the artists were doing, but curatorially is like sort of the way that is so active, and you have to be so present in it, and you step away from your cell phone for like 5 minutes, and all of a sudden like 10 minutes later there's a whole decision that's been made that you're like, okay, I'm gonna trust that was great. Just ride with it. And I think the trust that the artists in this exhibition have given us is really profound, and I really, really appreciate that. The trust that Ken and Maria have been able to sort of place in our hands. I think it's a privilege, and I think that resonates both in the digital and like in the tangible now that we're all here together.
Yeah, actually, I think there's like a lot to be said. There could be a lot that we could do to kind of backtrack through the process and try to figure out what worked and what didn't work. Because in fact, WhatsApp in our dynamic only came online at a point, and just things accelerated from there. I mean, there was the difficulties. I'm traveling a lot. Larry's traveling exceptional amount as well. We had different time zones. There was all this complication, and yet, and WhatsApp solved some of those problems. And still, I think that we could have done, now in retrospect, we could have done really a great deal better by setting up a set of tools and protocols, by how we were going to collect information, how we were going to share it, there's so many utilities around that we use day to day, but you got to bolt them together basically in like a unified technological process. And that would be a really amazing sort of curatorial offering, you could say. You know, we're busy doing that at A4 now. I'm kind of trying to map over different tools that are being used by startups to kind of get the team moving and share data, and realizing, wow, these things are free. And if you put them together in the right way and you experiment with them well, you suddenly have this like really effective unit, and we feel, well, some of that can actually be shared with other NGOs and other art organizations. But similarly, I think from a curatorial point of view, figuring out what tools, how they bolt together, how we're going to communicate. I think next time we did this, we would do it a lot better.
Yeah.